Welcome to Emotion Ships, where we talk about the real reason. Everything happens for a reason. I'm your host, Charlie Carroll, along with my amazing co-host, Mallory Redmond.
Boring.
Mallory, how are you today?
I'm so good.
Good. Welcome to episode 17. I'm excited.
Nice. No questioning. We just know. Episode 17.
We're there.
Yeah. Feels good.
Good news in the news. I don't know if you had a chance to catch up. I know that you are still moving into your new home with two little ones, but Moderna, which is a pharmaceutical company, posted some good news yesterday in regard to a trial with a vaccine for COVID-19.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah,
I missed that.
It's really cool, and we'll get into this here as the show goes on, but it uses RNA to basically get your body to have a big immune response to it, which anytime you can activate the body versus putting foreign substance into it, it is a huge ordeal. And so we cannot write the end of the story yet, but at least there was some initial good news that came out from them yesterday.
That is good. Maybe a little light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, let's hope so. Everyone could use a little bit of light.
Isn't that the truth? It's interesting to consider. I was just telling someone earlier today that I feel like I'm trying to figure out what my new normal is.
Sure.
But I think like the world is trying to figure out what our new normal will be once. I don't even know what the end of that sentence is.
Well,
once we get back to, once everything opens again, and so much of like the summer has been sort of, normal summer events have been canceled.
Yeah.
And so it's just interesting to consider when we'll feel,
for sure,
quote unquote, normal again, and what that even means.
Yeah, everything is still settling. When Amy and I moved back to Ohio in 2004, we decided to build a home in a Ryan Homes community, which was the first time we had ever built something. And, you go through that whole process, and then before you know it, a couple months have gone by and you are in your new home. And one of the things they tell you is that as things settle, as the ground still settles, that the house will shift and move a little bit, and that's going to cause issues where, the head will pop off, and drywall, you'll have holes in your drywall.
Excellent.
But that's where I think we're at, honestly, when it comes to COVID-19. The ground is still settling, and this could, in my opinion, this could go on for months.
Yeah.
Where everyone is still settling in after all of these changes.
Right. Yeah, that's a good visual for it.
Not so good news.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you saw this, but Ravi Zacharias passed away.
I did see that. That I caught.
What a brilliant mind matched by a tender heart.
Yeah.
I was sad to hear this. My wife Amy told me this last night, and I really did not know he had this battle with cancer. That was something new for me here recently, that I heard he was even battling with cancer.
Yes, a rare form of cancer, I believe.
Yeah, that's what I heard, but I guess he passed on into eternity with his family there in his home in Atlanta.
Oh, okay.
And so prayers for his family and loved ones, and for the whole community that he built.
Yeah, he was a giant.
He really was. And again, if you ever listened to him, which he had a lot of influence on my life, he was an apologist. For those of you that don't know what an apologist is, it's someone that uses reason and logic to argue a certain point. And in Ravi's case, maybe he will go down as the greatest apologist, Christian apologist of all time. I mean, he was that good. No one else has occupied the halls of Ivy League schools like Ravi did. Yeah. And for him to maintain the gentle spirit and the passion for people like he did is amazing.
Yeah. Well, he definitely did it right to do what he does, but with such tenderness. It's a little bit rare.
Yeah, he taught me a lot about truth. That was one of the things that he talked about often, was just the nature of truth,
Mm-hmm.
that the nature of truth is absolute. It is not relative, which uh, I think that's super important in the day and age in which we live, not just from a religious standpoint, but as we all pursue growth and development. It's very important to understand that the truth exists, which means it can be discovered. The nature of it is absolute, which means you don't have to worry about it shifting on you and becoming something different. You can put your confidence in that once you have all of the facts, and the truth, by definition, is that which adheres to the facts. So after you collect all of them and they're in front of you, like, that's something that you can have confidence in. And often living in this day where people benefit from people that don't have answers, right? Putting products and different pieces of information in front of us in order to move us in a direction. Ravi was awesome at teaching people that the nature of truth is absolute and that it can be known.
Yeah. That is the way that you described that, I found myself like kind of settling a little bit. Like, that's a very comfortable place to be.
Sure.
Right? When you can say, I hate math. Like,
Right.
math was not my thing, but my dad loves it. And he always says, like, I love it because it's just black and white. Like,
Sure.
either the answer is right or it's wrong. And there
Correct.
is something to be said for
100%.
that.
Yeah. Speaking of math, I did attempt to help my daughter with her third grade math yesterday.
Oh, that sounds terrifying.
I thought to myself, what in the world is going on in the world that a third grader is expected to know this?
Yeah. Yes, that's what I hear.
Talk about making my brain do gymnastics. It was pretty wild. But getting back to Ravi, though we don't say it because we don't have the words for it today, a lot of us would be tempted to operate as if truth is relative, which means what's right for you is right for you, and what's right for me is right for me. And you'll often hear someone say, like, no one knows what the truth is. But what is built into that statement, and this is what Ravi was really good at, is that's an absolute statement. That no one knows what the truth is an absolute statement made in a relative fashion. Or, I've had people say to me before that you can't enforce your beliefs on me, which is taking their belief that I can't enforce my beliefs on them and enforcing it on me.
Yes, right.
Which just means that this is built into the nature of truth, that there's accountability built into it. And here's why this is important and why no one should be intimidated by truth. All of us have an opportunity to pursue it and to discover truth in our own time frame. The example that I often give is, you're sitting across the table from me, but you're in the same room. And I've already heard you today say that it's cold in here.
Yeah, once or twice.
Yeah. And so if you say, man, it's cold in here, that doesn't compromise the nature of truth, though I don't feel like it's cold in here. Because Mallory Redmond, on this day, at this time, in this room, feels as if it is cold to her, though I might not feel that way. Right. And so often we find that we just don't take the statement all the way out to realize that the nature of truth is still very much absolute. And it needs to be absolute in order for us to continue moving forward in life and on that journey, that scientific journey to discover what truth is.
Right. Scientific journey.
Well,
can you say more about that?
Yeah, I use the word scientific on purpose, and I take little jabs here at people on this. A couple of weeks ago, the New York Times, released an article insinuating, or actually just coming out and saying that the right, the conservatives, and I think they said evangelicals, tend to be anti-science. And I was saying to a friend that I did not agree with that statement. Now, of course, if a community or if a party or a group of people become large enough, well, you're always going to be able to have a fringe on the left or the right or what have you.
Sure.
But in general, what I think we've done in light of making truth relative or being tempted to think that truth is relative is we turn science into a noun when the truth of the matter is science, the scientific method, is a verb, and it has to be a verb before it can become a noun. And when we use the word science as a noun, what we're saying is there's a body of facts, of knowledge, of evidence, and we imply that that evidence is true, and we call it, therefore, science. But that being said, science is the pursuit. It is the intellectual uncovering. It is the journey. It is the discovery process of the object, which is truth. And so truth, by definition, is that which adheres to the facts, and science is the pursuit of understanding and learning what adheres to the facts.
Science leads to truth.
Science should lead to truth, though we live in a day and age where others can benefit off of our unanswered questions or our uncertainty about any given thing that we're dealing with in life.
Like what? Can you give an example?
One of the things that I put out on social media this morning was Dr. Judy, and I'll always mess her last name up, but she came out with the recent pandemic movie. She has been a scientist for over 20 years and worked with Dr. Fauci, and basically was just coming out saying that she's not an anti-vaccine person, but that vaccines can be done in a better way, that they can, similar to what we opened the podcast with, that all vaccines are not created equal, and that we need to pay attention because some of the materials in the current vaccines, in her opinion, which I have not looked at her science, but in her opinion, some of the materials in the vaccines that we use today, because they have different components or biological components from animals, can actually serve to anchor corona-type viruses to us and make us more susceptible to them. And so when you start talking about something as simple as, and maybe it's not simple, but controversial as a vaccine, if truth is not absolute or it is not what adheres to the facts, then you have to look to other people's opinion and rely upon the experts more than do the work for yourself. And so one of the things that I'm passionate about and why I put that post out there is because I don't think it's healthy, and I think we have to fight to keep ourselves from ever getting to this place where other people are doing the research for us, or that we're taking and finding ourselves in these political or theological positions where we say, well, this is the way it is, and any other opinion is wrong, and allowing that to divide us.
Yeah. I was just telling someone earlier this week that there are a few people I know in my life who really enjoy researching.
Sure.
And so it's very easy for me to just sort of follow the path that they are trailblazing, because I believe that they've done their research. And so how they live their life, I trust it. Sure. Because I know them, and I get overwhelmed with doing research.
Right.
Because I don't know what messaging is benefiting who, right? So
right, sure.
With the vaccination conversation, for example, somebody, some sort of medical professional could tell me not to vaccinate my kids, and that makes me a patient of theirs, which puts money in their pocket.
Sure.
Whereas another medical professional could tell me to vaccinate my kids, which makes me a patient of theirs and puts money in their pocket. And so I feel that way with a lot of research. It's just like, I don't know what this website, who's funding that, and so I just get super overwhelmed, and it's easy for me to shut down.
Yeah.
I don't want to research because I don't know where to even begin.
Well, that's one reason why it is so important to have channels that we trust But even after we develop channels that we trust, like we are never going to or should never get away from the feeling or the obligation of having to discover truth for ourselves. And I guess one of the things that I'm passionate about and why I wanted to talk about this on the podcast is because truth by definition is that which adheres to the facts. The truth can be known. Science is how we get there. I mentioned this article, and the friend and I were discussing it. And one of the things that I said was that because science is a process of discovering what is true, it would be naive to think that our worldview, where we were raised, who we were raised with, our education, all of these other outside factors or the context in which we were raised or that we studied does not influence our science, the way we go on a journey to discover truth. And so that was my problem with the article, is to act as if the pursuit of truth is different than science. To treat science as a noun is to treat it as if it is a fact that will not change or that it is something that has been solidified.
Yeah.
When the truth of the matter is, science is the process as to how you get to your truth, which means we can't say, well, your opinion is your truth and my opinion is science.
Yeah.
Because all of us are equally susceptible to seeing only a certain part of the picture, drawing conclusions, calling it true, and then shutting ourselves off from anyone that sees that subject differently than ourselves.
So how do you even know when you've come to your truth, or do you ever? I mean, it sounds like it can be a lifelong.
Well, there are definitely things like gravity, right? That, I don't have to fully understand gravity in order to know that if I get up on a ladder today and jump off, gravity is going to have its effect on me, and it will equally have its effect on me tomorrow. Now, depending upon how high up I go determines the severity of the consequences of that truth. And we would be wise to understand that there are varying consequences to getting true things wrong or to saying this is true and I no longer need to consider it. Right. And that's kind of part of the problem, is that too often, as I said earlier, we almost hide behind what we would call science or conclusions because, and this is what we don't understand, our brains are wired in a way that they want to come up with a conclusion about a person or a subject or a certain situation, put that in the box, duct tape it up, and not think about it anymore. Because when you don't know everything or you're not sure about everything, then your brain has to still process as to whether or not that could help you or harm you or surprise you. And as we say on this podcast all the time, like, let's not forget what language actually is. Language, which is made up of paragraphs, which is made up of sentences, which is made up of words, which is made up of letters, which are shapes. All of those things are nothing more than an attempt to communicate or describe a reality. In most cases, the reality and the consequences of that reality are far greater than our ability to describe it.
Yeah. It is so comfortable. And it is a control thing too, right? To be
100%.
able to look at the political party is just the easy example. Like, you're a Republican, so this is everything you believe.
Correct.
You're a Democrat, so this is everything you believe. And to have it be that clear cut and simple, like, that would be really nice, but it's not. No. And I've gotten to know people who I get along with and I respect them and I love spending time with them. And then eventually in the relationship, I find something out about them that is like completely in disagreement with where my stance is.
For sure.
Whether it's politically or with faith or whatever. And that's so difficult to contend with, because then I want to say, like, you're either all good or all bad.
Sure.
And so when I love and agree with everything except this one thing, it's like, well, what do I do with that?
Yeah.
Like, this is a gray area.
Well, and what we don't understand often is our brain is made, and we say this all the time, in a way that it wants to draw those conclusions.
Yeah.
Because in the way our brain works is it will protect us from being surprised or caught off guard. All stress comes down to that word uncertainty.
Right.
And so our brain is working to get rid of all uncertainty, which means if you and I really jive in almost every area, but all of a sudden we discover a political difference, then the question, pops up on our self-defense system, which is our brain, and says, that's a surprise.
Yeah.
And because of the behavior I've seen from other people that call themselves, fill in the blank,
Right.
I wonder if I could be surprised about other things. And if I could be surprised, I wonder if I could be hurt. So it's better to just take that person and put them in a box and be done with it than to leave myself open to other surprises.
Yeah.
But the trick there is that though we feel uncomfortable and surprises are not always good, that's how we grow.
Mm-hmm.
And so more than, getting on here to talk about politics or vaccines, what we're about is looking at the energy behind things, the real reason why things are happening, the real reason why we'd want to say, well, they believe this way, so I'm really going to kind of slowly pull back because that makes me uncomfortable. Well, the magic is really in discovering why does that particular situation make you uncomfortable, and why are you moving away from feeling uncomfortable, knowing that the only way to really grow and progress in life is by embracing that lack of feeling comfortable.
Right. Oh gosh, I feel sick even thinking about just the process of it. It's so hard, right?
Sure.
Like to start to, and we talk about this, to start to unravel or undo things that have been built in our system, in our bodies, in our life for the entirety of our existence, right? Like the emotionship.
Yeah.
And so if I have a fear of or a distaste for, whatever belief system
Sure.
you might have, it's really hard to move closer
Yeah.
to you
Sure.
and to undo what has been built in me.
Yeah. Well, in that particular case, it would be the fear of rejection. And because of the day and age in which we have been raised, it's not uncommon that a lot of us are still dealing with childhood trauma that was in the form of rejection. And so it's easier to remove myself from any relationships where I could potentially be rejected versus staying in that situation and growing through or from feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Often there are two primary reasons why we can't stay in that uncomfortable environment when it comes to a differing opinion or someone being in a different place when it comes to truth, that which adheres to the facts, and science, how we discover those facts. Number one, we see it in family members who, or friends that we love, that we think we have a better grasp or a clearer reality of what that truth is. And they're pursuing it in a different way, or they're not there yet, and we don't want them to get hurt. What's hard about that is often we will force ourselves on that person and make them choose what they believe to be true at the time or a relationship with us. It never works.
Yeah.
And I used to have a soccer coach that would say, don't turn one mistake into two.
Yeah.
Don't let your reaction to the first mistake create a whole nother problem. We see this in moral failure all the time. When a dad or a mom, for one reason or another, whether it's childhood trauma, whether it's being too busy at work, not having a will anymore because they've given it all to whatever they're creating or their work, they have an extramarital affair, and out of hurt, right? The emotionship is hurt and rejection. The spouse or the children say, if you don't rectify this right away, you're not going to be able to have a relationship with us.
Yeah.
Which, if that spouse or those children are the healthy ones in the relationship, what you did was really just kick dirt on their grave, because you blew up the bridge, often the only bridge that that individual could have crossed to come back into life and wholeness.
Right.
And it's all because we don't know how to respond to the feelings of rejection or hurt that we're facing. And so we end up making stupid statements like, hey, if you don't get rid of him, and I see this time and time again every year, or if you don't get rid of her, you're not going to be able to have a relationship with us. And what ends up happening is what took 3, 6, 9, 10, 12 months to develop doesn't go away overnight.
Right.
There are real dynamics there. And so getting back to those two things, the first thing is often it's hard to give people the time and patience to get to where they need to get to when it comes to that which adheres to the facts, truth, through an approach called science. That's the number one thing. It's hard to see somebody you love go through that and give them the time. And then the second thing is it's hard not to allow our personal insecurities to get in the way when it comes to interacting with and loving on someone that has a different opinion than we do.
Yeah.
Very few of us have the ability to divorce our position from our person. So if I say, well, this is what I believe, you shouldn't be doing this, and you say, I don't really see that, then your rejection of my position is often taken personally. And then we say, well, we're not going to be able to get along or really have a relationship because you don't respect me. Well, it's not that they don't respect you. They're just in a different place, or their upbringing or their education or the part of the country they were raised in. It's a totally different thing from a cultural or environmental perspective. Mm-hmm. And so they're just in a different place.
Yeah.
I think the equation that is powerful in all of this, when you get into these like hot topics where people just flip out and do crazy stuff. I had people texting me and calling me this morning when I put that post out saying, don't get in this, don't go there, like don't touch vaccines, you'll ruin your reputation.
Right. Don't rock that boat.
Yeah. It comes back to like, hold on a second. We have to be able to pursue that which adheres to the facts using science, which is a verb before it's a noun. And then the third component that I think is a must that we often forget is love has to anchor and be the third leg on the stool for those two things. We see this in the teachings of Jesus, like and the Apostle Paul. If you don't have love, you're just a bunch of noise, and nobody wants to hear noise. Mm-hmm. So it's, hey, pursue truth. Like, pursue truth for yourself. Don't be lazy and don't let your own insecurities get in the way. Pursue truth for yourself. Number 2, you're going to have to use science. And science is a process by which you uncover what is true from what is not true. While you're doing that and you're bumping into or doing life with people that are in different places than you are, you've got to have that third leg on the stool, and that's love. Love, by definition, is a verb. It's an action, a choice to prefer the other person and put their needs in front of your own. It's one of the ways that I start off all of my premarital counseling. What's your definition of love? And often what I get back to, or what comes back to me, is that love is a feeling. And I said, well, that makes sense because most people that want to get divorced that come to see me or talk to me say, well, we just don't love each other anymore.
Yeah. Fell out of love.
Yeah. You don't fall out of love. Now, you might not have the same affection or passion for one another, but that's because you stopped loving each other a long time ago. And love, by definition, is a choice to prefer the other person and put their needs in front of your own. Yeah. And so, what I have found is you cannot divorce truth, science, and love. All three of those components have to be there if we are going to grow on a personal level, if we're going to grow in our relationships, and if our community is going to become the best version of itself.
That's so good. Like, you think about just removing one of those from the equation, and it really doesn't work. It really doesn't. And I'm so glad that love is the third one. Like, I'm just so glad that you said that, because it just brings peace. Like, even just to this conversation of like, oh yes, like we can all be on our own journey of pursuing truth via science and yet still be loving one another, preferring one another, even in the disagreements, even if our journeys are taking us in to different places.
Well, and it comes back to, if you find yourself getting worked up when somebody, thinks differently than you do about vaccines, ask yourself why. Why are you getting so worked up?
Yeah. So that's something I want to ask about, not necessarily specifically, not at all specifically about vaccines, though that is a good example of how do we prefer one another when our decision can be impacting another person. Do you know what I mean? So like if I decide not to vaccinate my children,
Sure.
That could potentially impact your children. So what does that look like that preference for the other?
Sure. Well, it depends on, the specific situation. It reminds me of when someone said, well, if the golden rule or Jesus, if your teaching is all about loving thy neighbor as thyself, which is advocating love, the next question would be, then who is my neighbor? And what the text implies is that the listener was basically wanting to say, so you're telling me I'm just responsible for the person on my left, my right, in front of me, and behind me. And Jesus basically says, no, your neighbor is whoever is in front of you at the current moment and has a need. And if you just look at that small narrative, you see mankind or humanity's desire, again, to put something in the box and say, okay, so I just have to worry about 4 people in front of me, behind me, right and left, and then I don't have to do anything else. But, that's what we're talking about is truth is alive. Mm-hmm. It's living, it's breathing, it's moving. I mean, the presidential task force for this COVID-19 with all of their press conferences, just the other day, Joe Rogan on his podcast put out a clip from Dr. Fauci on 60 Minutes. And it's 2 weeks, I believe, into March. And the interviewer says to Dr. Fauci, now, are you sure we don't have to wear masks? And Dr. Fauci, now having months to hear about COVID-19 and he's been around it for a long time, says, yeah, the average person that does not have pre-existing conditions does not need to be wearing a mask. They can go out and be in public and they don't need a mask. And the interviewer says, are you sure? Because people are hearing, other people say that they do. And he says, no, they don't. Well, fast forward that 5 or 6 weeks, and now Dr. Fauci is wearing masks in the press conference where for weeks on end, he wasn't doing it. And so that's what I mean. Like, we cannot draw lines around positions and act as if they don't ever have to be revisited or reconsidered. And when we reconsider things, we have to do it in the context of love and say, okay, maybe this isn't something that I believe in or that I have to do, specifically using the idea of a mask here, but maybe I'm going to wear one while I am doing these things to prefer the weaker person or to give the right or to send the right message to those that might not understand it on the level that I do. Right. Getting into that part of the post that I put out this morning with Dr. Judy, she was saying, and she took a lot of heat for this, that masks can make you more susceptible to COVID-19. And what I would say to that is, if you understand that human beings have an exhaust system like automobiles, and that comes out our breath and it's CO2, carbon dioxide, you understand that you really don't need to be breathing it, that it can make you pass out. And some people have different reactions to it where their face breaks out after wearing a mask, which would mean that COVID-19 started in a SARS lab, which is funny because we'll put this in the notes, getting back to this idea of, is truth absolute and can the truth be known and what is science? On the 13th of April, CNN put an article out saying 30% of the American public believes that COVID-19 could be some sort of hoax or conspiracy theory. 56% of the American public believes that this was human engineered. We're almost certain it was not. Well, now just a couple of weeks go by, and more evidence, that which adheres to the facts, is coming out that though it might not have been intentionally released, COVID-19 was developed in a MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome is what that stands for, and SARS, Severe Acute Respiratory System, lab, and that there is some human engineering to it. Now, again, I was talking with a friend about this, and I sent them an article from someone I trust, and they sent me an article right back saying the exact opposite.
Oh gosh. I mean, that's the thing. You research one thing, you can find equal and opposite view on it anywhere.
And so where do we stop when it
Yes.
comes to that? And the
Great
answer to that is every single one of us has a responsibility to use science to pursue truth. Science and truth do not contradict one another. Sometimes the science will say, well, this is what appears to be true. Well, the longer time goes on and the more information, like in Dr. Fauci's case, that we get, well, then maybe some factors outweigh certain uncertainties, and now we are going to wear a mask. What I would say, getting back to the idea of CO2 and weakening your lungs, this is what Dr. Judy was basically trying to point out, is that if you're breathing a lot of CO2, I just had an employee come to me yesterday that said, hey, I was wearing my mask all day and I started to feel lightheaded. Well, that's very explainable. Mm-hmm. And so what we're going to in all of our businesses are the shields, that you can wear a shield, be compliant, be a good example. Mm-hmm. It might be different from where you are personally, but if you're in a position of leadership, or you have an organization where people that might not see it the way that you see it are coming in and are looking to you as a leader, well, then love would ask us to come up with some sort of compromise, if at all possible, to keep people safe.
Yeah.
Now, that being said, my kids are not vaccinated, and that's my right. And you know what? Maybe as time goes on, we'll discover that I was wrong and that some of the biological components that are harvested from animals, maybe it wasn't an anchor to COVID type viruses, or that there is no connection between that and autism or cancer and all of the other things that you see. All of us have the responsibility to use science to pursue truth, and at no given time is one person ever going to be completely right. You've probably lived long enough to know and to think about past situations where you were certain you were dead right. Yeah. And as time went on, or as you learned more, you realized that you had made a mistake. Yeah. And that's why love is so important. That's why love has to be the anchor and the binding agent that allows all of us in our time to pursue truth using science.
Paul in 1 Corinthians talks about not eating meat if it's going to offend.
Yeah.
Can you use that example, or can you kind of put that into this conversation?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's radical, but I mean, if we look at the teaching of Jesus and therefore the teaching of Paul and a lot of the epistles, it really comes back to what the Jesus movement was about, was putting other people's needs in front of your own. And so in that situation, you know, similar to wearing a face shield or a mask, though you might not agree with it or think it's important, okay, don't wear a mask, but wear a shield if you're in an environment where you know people are sensitive or might have pre-existing conditions, or they're a part of an age demographic that the science we have so far is telling us are more vulnerable to this specific virus. I think it's 80 to 82% of the people that have passed are over the age of 65. And so if I'm 65 years old, if I'm 60 years old, I'm probably going to look at it differently than when I'm 40 years old. Though I'm 40 years old today, I will be 60 before we know it. And so this is the idea of love, where I take into consideration what other people are dealing with and what other people are going through, and I make decisions accordingly. Like the heart of the gospel is the golden rule, like do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Right.
It's laying your life down for another person. Now, there are choke points or tension points where it's a little difference to consider injecting a foreign substance into my child versus that of putting on a mask or a shield.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point in time, all of us have to be accountable for two things. Number one, our own right to use science to pursue truth. That's number one. All of us got to take that on. Nobody is exempt from that. And number two, we're all accountable to let people make that decision in their own time, no different than we wanted to make that decision in our own time.
Right. What do you think there comes a point relationally where you just have to agree to disagree on some things,
yeah,
right?
of course.
And so what does that look like to continue to move towards the other?
Sure.
Which is, that's kind of like psychological language there, but to move towards the other in the midst of like, this is something that we just don't see the same.
Well, and I'll answer that. But the reality of it is, the reason why that's so hard to move towards another person in the midst of disagreement is because I think a lot of us fail to understand the role personal insecurity plays when it comes to pursuing truth by using science. That almost like, the Wizard of Oz, science as a noun becomes the ultimate Wizard of Oz that hides behind a curtain where there are no more questions. Don't ask me any more questions. Right. This is science, right? Like this is concrete, irrefutable science. You asking me that is ridiculous. Don't ask me.
Yeah.
At the heart of that is someone whose position is attached to their person. If you took our personal positions out of it, it would not be nearly as hard to see a person's different position than your own. And so to answer that question, you got to start there and understand that we have been convinced through our culture that our hard work, our performance, our good grades, our straight A's is what makes us really valuable, when that's not true. All of those things are good things, but that's not what makes you valuable. That's not what makes you worth listening to. One of the things that I said in the TED Talk a couple of weeks ago is that I'm passionate about this because those that are dealing with financial poverty or substance abuse or have been incarcerated and are trying to get back into society, they've lost their voice. They don't have a voice. And often they don't have a voice because our society has said people that have behaved this way must deserve it, that their actions have put them in that situation. And therefore, because they've acted that way, they don't deserve to be listened to or to be heard.
Yeah.
And so when we get into these conversations where we have two totally different perspectives, we get to that place where you're attacking my substance. You're attacking me as a person, not my position. And if you're attacking me, then I'm not going to listen to you. Right. I can justify having a different position, and you must be wrong because of the way you're coming at me.
Yeah. Oh man, the worst is when you see this on social media.
Oh
my goodness, because people feel very brave behind their computer or their screen. And it's so easy to mute the people you don't agree with. And so then you can just kind of be engaging with the people who are on the same side of the street as you are and not have to deal with somebody that has a different idea about something.
Yeah, the saying that I love is that big dogs don't bark. And that in my years of having an opportunity to lead people, and the more responsibility you have, the easier it is for people to criticize you. The more known you are, the more seen you are, it's easier for people from below to take shots at you because you are more visible, you are louder. And as I have tried to practice being the better person or the bigger person, I have had to remind myself that big dogs don't bark. They don't get upset or bothered by the little yappers. They know who they are. They know what makes them who they are, and they're not intimidated by someone who would have to make a lot of noise in order to make them feel better about themselves and me less about myself because of my position.
Yeah. You know what's really hard for me is in the conversation about truth and kind of where research and science takes me personally on a
Sure.
decision is I am so aware that I could be wrong that I feel like I get small in those conversations. Like,
Sure.
I don't like debating. I don't like even something like this is stretching me a little bit because I am so aware that I might be completely off, right?
Yeah.
And that this is such a journey, and that more information about whatever it might be might continue to roll out. And so I think just before we started recording, you said something about how, well, if somebody can't defend like their stance on something, then they don't really know it or they haven't done their research. And for me, I feel like sometimes I can defend it, but I guess it's a personal insecurity where it's like I'm just so aware of my ability to be wrong.
Well, that position of humility is something that I think we all need to have, like an awareness of how wrong we can be. Funny story, and I'll tell it on the podcast, and then I still need to make the phone call.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, I have been, I've had a service cut my grass now since we moved in. And periodically, especially after we got our landscaping done, I would go outside and I would get really frustrated because clippings from the grass were blown into the dark mulch. And it was just really frustrating to me. And so I sent a text to the gentleman that does the lawn and just said, hey, like, is there a way that we can prevent this? Because, I pay money to have mulch put in there and pay money to cut the grass, and then it looks poor. And so it went back and forth where 2 or 3 times I'm like, hey, like, there's a decent amount of grass in here. And so finally I go out one day because I pull in from work right when it's getting finished, and I walk by one of the beds and it's got a decent amount of grass in it. And it's not a crazy amount, but noticeable.
Sure.
And so I went up to the gentleman and I said, like, this is exactly what I'm talking about. Like, what can we do about this? Because I don't want to pay to have grass cut and then blown into my beds. And he said, you've texted me on multiple occasions about this. I've been cutting grass for a very long time. How about I give you, and he was being serious. He was like, how about I give you my blower off my back and you show me how it's done?
Okay.
Now, in the moment, I thought to myself, and I think I said to him, like, I cut grass for a long time prior to being in this position where I'm not cutting my own. I could do that if I needed to. I'm not telling you to be perfect. I'm just asking you, is there an alternative way to get this done? Well, fast forward 6 to 8 months.
Okay.
And I recently decided that I was going to train my 15-year-old to cut the grass. I don't feel good as a father with my boys, or my daughter for that matter, leaving my house and not knowing how to take care of the property in which they live at.
Yeah,
and so I text the same gentleman and said, hey, we're going to lay off. I'm going to have my son, I'm going to teach him how to cut the grass. And then when we're traveling, I'll still utilize your services if that's cool. He said, he was really gracious. He said, yeah, no worries. That's cool.
Yeah, because he knew what was coming for you.
I cut my grass this past weekend for the first time.
Insert applause. Oh, that's even more appropriate.
That's a laugh. That is appropriate. And I put grass everywhere.
Sure.
I put so much grass in my beds. I was just fired up. And I thought to myself, here I am having to relearn how hard this is. And I'm going to have to call this gentleman and apologize to him because just even a certain amount of time, or it's a different yard than what I was used to.
Right.
It's a different yard than what I grew up cutting. So there's that difference and that opportunity to get it wrong. And I just couldn't see it all.
Yeah.
And so now it's that, talking about that which adheres to the facts, and a process of learning, or in my case, relearning that. It's an opportunity now. In this case, love is on the backside, where I go to him and I say, listen, I got that wrong, man. You actually were doing a really good job. And I'm sorry for being difficult and hard on you when I was just disconnected from it.
Right. Oh, that's so good.
But like that CNN article, it's given percentages about how many people, like almost scoffing at the people that could think that this could ever be human engineered or come out of a lab. Well, it just took a couple of weeks.
Right.
And in this situation, we're uncovering more information. Now, it doesn't mean that absolute truth doesn't exist and that there aren't certain things that we know right away to be true, right? Almost instantly, every healthy person understands when they treat somebody the wrong way, and they need to own it as soon as possible.
Yeah.
But there are definitely a lot of situations where if you don't have the three legs to that stool, pursuing truth through science, exercising love, we're going to be in trouble.
Your language of being disconnected from it, in the lawn example, I think is so important, because for him,
I was removed.
Yeah, and for him, like, this is his job.
Oh,
like,
I shake
that
my
is
head.
And I'm not trying to shame you. I'm just trying to say, like, that it was a really big deal for him. Like, that's what is putting food on his family's table. And for you, you're rolling home after a long day of work, and you're just like pissed about how your lawn looks. Because it didn't matter, like the process didn't matter as much to you, it was just the result. And so I think that is so important in this conversation, is there are things that like don't matter as much to me that matter a lot to you. And so how I react and how I behave in that realm matters because it matters to you. That's so good.
Well, it's very easy for ignorance to create arrogance, and you don't even know it.
Ooh, say that again.
Yeah. It's
So
very
easy.
easy. For ignorance to create arrogance.
That's so good.
And you don't know it.
Yeah.
And so what does love do? Love realizes it on the backside and comes back and says, oh man, I'm just shaking my head. What arrogance to think that here's somebody that's trying hard and cutting grass 5, 6, 7, 8 yards a day. And here's this business guy rolling up, hasn't sweat for the day, and he's going to tell you how he could do it better. Yeah. Embarrassing.
Yeah, a little bit. But now you know.
Yeah, and you own it.
Yeah.
And that's why, again, it's so important to understand that it's got to be truth, that which adheres to the facts, utilizing science as a verb, a process for investigating and discovering truth for ourselves, and love, putting other people's needs in front of our own.
Yeah. The image that I get is, on the car dealerships that have like the air inflated bodies.
Good one, Mel.
Maybe we'll put a image in the notes. You know what I mean? Like they blow air up, and it's like a guy where the arms.
Yeah.
To draw attention from the road.
Yeah.
Do you actually know what I'm saying?
100%. There is a word for them. My brother had those. Like, they're not shocks, but I know what you're saying.
Anyway, it doesn't really matter. That's just the image that I get in how we should be kind of malleable or just open to being light and loose.
Well, and you can if A, you're not being lazy and you're investigating things for yourself. That article said that over 50% of people rely upon social media for their facts.
Please do not do that.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
And so you can do that. You can be light and loose if A, you're not being intellectually lazy, and B, your position doesn't make who you are as a person.
Yeah.
It's pursuing that which adheres to the facts through science and always erring on the side of love. Episode 17, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in. We will see you next time.